You never forget the moment you watch your home go up in flames. The way the fire crackles, not like a warm fireplace, but like something alive, something angry. You feel it in your teeth. You hear your whole life being eaten alive by heat and smoke and fury. But what you never expect is that the fire was lit on purpose, and that it came from your neighbors. Most people think HOAs are harmless, just some folks arguing over mailbox paint or lawn height. But let me tell you something, when people get a taste of power and they think you're standing in the way of their perfect little kingdom, they will go to war with a smile on their face. And in my case, they chose fire. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. Because I'm not just some quiet guy with a big house and no interest in their bake sales and block parties. I'm a state judge, retired, sure, but still respected, still connected, still watching, and I don't lose. This story started 2 years ago when I bought the old Collins property at the edge of Hawthorne Oaks. Beautiful place, 5 bedrooms, wide porch, old-growth trees, surrounding the lot like silent guardians. It had been empty for years. The owners passed away, and their children never had time to deal with it. I got it for a fair price. Too fair, it turns out, because that house sat just outside the formal boundary of the Hawthorne Oaks HOA, just barely. 20 feet of legal freedom, to be exact. It drove the HOA board crazy. I didn't need to join. Didn't want to. I didn't care about their pool key cards, or their monthly newsletter, or their lectures about fence height and neighborhood uniformity. I was a quiet man, content to keep to myself. My lawn was clean, my hedges trimmed. I wasn't causing problems, but I didn't join, and that made me a problem. At first, it was petty. A note left on my windshield at the grocery store. Please, consider joining the HOA. Don't be that neighbor. Then a knock on the door from a woman named Linda Hargrave. Blonde, polished, vice president of the HOA, clipboard, always in hand. She smiled like she'd already won something. We just wanted to extend a friendly invitation to formally become part of the community, she said, peering over my shoulder at my entryway. We have very reasonable annual dues. I told her, politely, that I wasn't interested, that I'd purchased outside of the association line, and I intended to stay that way. Her smile tightened. Well, she said, everyone benefits from our work, even if they don't join. It's only fair. Fair. That word stuck in my head. I'd spent 30 years in courtrooms, watching people twist fair into whatever shape they needed. It's never about fairness, it's about control. Linda wanted to own every inch of the street. My independence was a stain she couldn't scrub over the next few months. The pressure ramped up. They started ticketing my trash cans. Not the city them. Slapping HOA-style warnings on my door, even though they held no authority over my property. I had to call code enforcement just to get them to back off. Then came the noise complaints. Every time I used my lawnmower, well, within local limits, I'd get a notice. Once, I was sanding down an old bench on my porch. The next day, a citation arrived in my mailbox: unauthorized home renovation. Of course, none of it stuck. I sent formal cease and desist letters, reminded them of the property lines, cited local and state law, told them in the plainest legal terms to leave me alone. But these people weren't used to being told no, so they escalated. One night, someone slashed the tires on my car. 2 nights later, a bag of raw garbage appeared on my lawn. Carefully placed, no mess. Just enough to make a statement. It was never direct, always just on the edge of deniability. And then came the meeting. I attended a local town hall about upcoming development plans. Nothing to do with the HOA, but they were there, all of them, sitting in a row like robed judges. Linda saw me. She leaned in and whispered, "You don't belong here." I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "That's funny. I was going to say the same to you. I should have walked away then. But I didn't, because deep down, I wanted to see how far they'd go. I wanted them to keep pushing. I didn't think they'd pushed this far." One night, late autumn, just past 11 p.m., I was sitting in my living room reading a deposition transcript for a law review article I was writing. A strange sound broke the quiet, the unmistakable sheck of metal scraping glass. I stood quickly and saw the shadows of someone moving past my side window. By the time I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out, the smell hit me. Gasoline. And then the fire came. It started in the garage, fast, hot, and hungry. Within minutes, flames clawed their way across the ceiling. I called 911, grabbed the extinguisher, but it was too late. Smoke poured into the house. The heat warped the frames. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the entire right side of my home was an inferno. I stood in the yard in my pajamas, coughing, shaking with rage, watching 30 years of work go up in smoke. The chief came over, grim-faced. "This wasn't electrical," he said. "We'll investigate immediately." And investigate they did. Turns out, the accelerant had been poured through a shattered basement window. Whoever did it knew how to start a fast, quiet burn. Security footage from across the street, grainy but clear enough, showed a hooded figure walking up the drive carrying a canister. Couldn't make out the face, but I knew. I didn't have proof, but I knew. and they'd messed up, because when you try to burn down a judge's house, you don't just commit arson, you make a public enemy out of someone who knows the system inside out. I spent the next week in a hotel, breathing through filters, answering insurance calls, and assembling a legal war chest like I was going to trial for my life, because I was. I called in favors, former clerks, detectives, journalists, even a few political allies. We built a timeline, cross-referenced every complaint, every petty violation, every documented encounter, and then something broke open. One of the former HOA board members, a young guy named Devin who had stepped down months earlier, called me. "I think you need to see something," he said. We met at a diner on the edge of town. He looked nervous, pale. He slid a USB stick across the table. "It's meeting recordings," he whispered. "They record everything. For transparency, they're not supposed to delete them, but I kept copies." That night, in my hotel room, I plugged in the drive. The recordings were rough, echoing, full of chatter, but on one track dated 3 weeks before the fire, I heard it. Linda's voice. She was frustrated, furious. "He's making us look weak," she snapped. "He acts like he's untouchable. Maybe we should remind him that being part of a community isn't optional." Another voice, a man's, chuckled nervously. "What, are we going to throw bricks through his windows?" Linda didn't laugh. "I don't care what it takes. I want him gone." My skin went cold. It wasn't a confession. Not direct, but it was motive, malice, proof of obsession, and I was going to use it. I handed the drive to the fire marshal and my attorney the next morning, and I began preparing the kind of lawsuit that makes headlines, because now, it wasn't just about my house, it was about the rot beneath the white picket fences. The smiling tyranny of self-appointed suburban rulers who thought fear could bend law. They were wrong. They forgot who I was, and they were about to find out. The thing about fire is it reveals, not just damage, not just ashes, it reveals character, who shows up to help, who goes quiet, who starts whispering behind closed doors, and who thinks they can walk away clean. After the flames were out and the embers cooled, the neighborhood was silent. The same people who had spent the past year leaving notes on my door, sending HOA warnings, and filing complaints, had suddenly vanished into their perfect houses with trimmed hedges and spotless driveways. No one knocked, no one called, not even to fake sympathy. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I filed the insurance claim. But I didn't just stop there. I filed a formal criminal complaint. I wasn't relying on assumption, I had evidence. The meeting recordings, the history of harassment. The arson investigation was ongoing, but my attorney and I were already preparing a civil case against the HOA board and its executive officers. This wasn't a dispute anymore. This was a war, and I was done being polite. 3 days after the fire, I held a press conference. It wasn't flashy, just me, my lawyer, a podium, and a few reporters, but word had spread. Judge's home targeted by arson, HOA suspected. The public was curious. People were angry. I stood behind that podium in a borrowed suit, the fire damage visible in the background. And I spoke the truth. For over a year, I was harassed by members of a private neighborhood association, simply because I chose not to join them. That harassment escalated into threats, damage, and now a fire set intentionally, putting my life at risk and destroying part of my home. This is what unchecked power looks like. This is what happens when community governance turns into personal vendettas. Reporters leaned in. Questions flew. You believe the HOA was directly involved. I believe they created the environment. I believe they encouraged hostility. And I believe they thought they could intimidate me into submission. They were wrong. The clip aired that night. The segment went viral. People from across the state started commenting. Some with stories of their own. HOAs bullying elderly residents, forcing families out with fine after fine, sending threats over minor violations. I was just the first to go public in a big way. And that terrified them. The HOA board scrambled. 2 days later, I received a letter and sign saying they categorically denied any involvement and condemned any violence against members of the community. Then, they lawyered up. Good. So did I. What they didn't know was that I had more than just legal firepower. I had the ear of the state bar. I had retired judges. I had former clerks now working in media, policy, and law enforcement. When someone tries to burn down a judge's house and get away with it, you don't just call the police. You call everyone. And they started calling back. An investigative reporter from a major regional outlet contacted me. She'd been following HOA abuses across the state. Said mine was the most extreme case she'd seen. We sat for an interview. I'm not the victim here, I told her. The real victim is what community was supposed to mean. These people took that word and twisted it into something ugly. She asked me if I ever feared for my life. No, I said, because I'm not afraid of cowards. The story aired that week. It included parts of the audio recording, Linda's voice, her threats, her obsession with making an example out of me. That's when the cracks started showing. First, one board member resigned. Then another. Linda tried to act unbothered. She posted a tone-deaf message in the HOA's private group claiming I was using a tragic accident for personal gain. But that didn't land well, because by now, the community wasn't on her side anymore. I wasn't the outsider, she was. Residents started posting in neighborhood forums about their own issues. How the HOA had forced one family to remove a tree, planted in memory of their son. How another couple was fined repeatedly for parking their truck on their own driveway. Dozens of little stories, all adding up to one truth. This wasn't just about me, it was about them. I kept building the case. My lawyer filed a subpoena for all HOA meeting transcripts and communications, emails, texts, records. Their attorney tried to stall, claimed privacy. But the judge approved the request, and that's when we found it. An email thread between Linda and two board members dated just days before the fire. The subject line, handling our judge problem inside. They discussed escalation options, and one member even mentioned a friend who used to do cleanup work on properties. That was the phrase that changed everything. We handed that straight to the prosecutor's office. Meanwhile, I filed a civil suit for harassment, property damage, and conspiracy to intimidate a public official. It was no longer just a community scandal. It became a criminal investigation. And the public ate it up. I was invited onto radio shows, local talk panels, not because I sought attention, but because people were furious. It wasn't about lawn rules anymore. It was about abuse of power. People related to it. Everyone had a story about an overreaching HOA. I just happened to be the guy who fought back with everything I had. And then came the twist I didn't expect. One evening, about 6 weeks after the fire, I got a call. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end was shaking. "This is Devin," he said. "I used to be on the board. You need to know something else." He told me they'd hired someone, not just a friend. Not just a scare tactic. A man with a record, arson from a decade ago. Burglary, now freelancing as contractor. For off-the-books jobs, he said Linda paid him under the table to send a message. He wasn't supposed to burn the place down, just make it scary. But he took it too far, Devin said, almost whispering. He panicked when you came outside. That wasn't the plan. I asked him why he was coming forward. "'Cause I can't sleep," he said, "and because someone like you doesn't deserve this." He agreed to testify, anonymously at first, then publicly. It was over after that. The contractor was arrested, caught trying to leave the state, charged with arson and attempted homicide. And Linda, she was indicted for conspiracy, reckless endangerment, and obstruction of justice. The HOA collapsed within a month, dissolved, leadership gone. Residents voted unanimously to abolish the association altogether. They formed a new neighborhood. Watch a real one, voluntary, respectful. Some of them even reached out to apologize. I wasn't angry anymore, because justice had done its job. And the fire, it didn't destroy me. It reminded me who I was, not a victim. A voice, one that doesn't stay quiet. When you've spent decades in a courtroom, you learn something about people. Their true character shows only under pressure. And the people running the HOA, well, they cracked like glass under a hammer. After the arsonist was arrested and Linda was indicted, everything shifted. Suddenly, neighbors who used to glare from their porches started waving. The silence on my street cracked open with whispers of apologies, cautious questions, even the occasional casserole. But I wasn't looking for pity or praise. I was looking to finish what they started, because while the criminal case worked its way through the courts, my civil suit was gaining momentum. And now, with Devin's testimony and the digital paper trail from their own emails, we had something rare in legal circles: clarity, intent, malice. It wasn't about money. I didn't want their HOA dues or settlements. I wanted exposure. I wanted to show the state what happens when small, unchecked private governments grow arrogant. And I wanted this case to be a warning. The courtroom was packed the day we filed the public hearing motion. Press, local activists, lawyers from all sides. My legal team walked in with folders thick with evidence: audio, emails, transcripts, incident reports. And I walked in with just one document in hand, a simple letter from a local family who'd been forced to move out after being fined over and over again for fence color violations and yard aesthetics. They had a child with disabilities, couldn't keep up with the rules. The HOA fined them until their savings were gone. Who I was fighting for now, not just myself. The judge, to her credit, allowed the motion for open records. Every document we submitted became public, and when local media got a hold of it, the story exploded again. Headlines read, "Judge's lawsuit reveals shocking HOA abuses." Email trail links HOA board to arson suspect. Small town, big fire, inside the collapse of a neighborhood empire. Linda's lawyer tried to claim she was set up, that she never authorized anything criminal. But Devin's testimony cut through that like a hot knife. He sat calmly, hands folded, and said, "I was there when she said it." She wanted to scare him. She called it a lesson in humility. I didn't know it would go this far, but I knew she wanted him out, and the moment that sealed it, an audio recording I'd saved. 1. The media hadn't played yet that it was a voicemail. Linda had left it on my machine late one night, long before the fire. Slurred words, bitter tone. You think you're smarter than everyone else, don't you? Sitting up there in your big porch chair, judging the rest of us like you're still in court, but you're not. You're just another neighbor. And we don't like troublemakers in this neighborhood. That voicemail played in court. The room went silent. The judge looked over her glasses and said, "Noted." The trial didn't drag. The facts were too heavy, the evidence too loud, and when the verdict came down, it felt almost surreal. I won, not just the case, but the conversation. Linda was sentenced to 5 years for conspiracy and obstruction, with parole eligibility in 2. The arsonist 10 years, no parole. The HOA was officially dissolved under state oversight, and something else happened. The state legislature took notice. I was invited to testify at a hearing about HOA overreach, unregulated power, and civilian abuse through private associations. I spoke for 18 minutes, no notes. I told them that community governance should be about protection, not control, that private groups should never be allowed to fine, punish, or threaten people without due process, that if a retired judge could have his home set on fire over a disagreement, imagine what might happen to someone without the tools to fight back. The room erupted in applause. Not because of me, but because someone finally said what so many were thinking. And then the letters started coming. From Kansas, from Florida, from California. People who had lost homes, peace, health, all in fights with their HOAs. They told me my case gave them hope, gave them language, gave them a voice. That changed everything. I started working with a nonprofit that specialized in community legal aid. Together, we launched an initiative to help homeowners defend themselves against HOA harassment. We called it Fireline, a symbol of the fight to draw the line between fairness and fear. Volunteers poured in, lawyers, former judges, even whistleblowers from HOAs across the country. We built a network, quietly and powerfully, and then, something happened that I'll never forget. A woman from Georgia sent me a video. She stood in front of her house, a modest brick home. Kids behind her, waving, and she said, "Your story saved our home. They tried to evict us over a basketball hoop, but now I knew what to say, what to demand. And I told them, we're not afraid of you anymore." That one hit me hard, because, when they burned my house, they thought they were ending something, but what they really did was light a torch, and I carried it everywhere. The first wall we raised was the back kitchen. I remember the sound of the hammer, sharp, honest, full of meaning. My home was coming back. Not from insurance alone, not just from bricks and boards, but from fire. And this time, every inch of it felt earned. I had stood in a courtroom and stared down the same people who once left garbage on my lawn, who whispered behind fences, who thought they could scare me out of my own land. And now I was standing in the very place they tried to erase, rebuilding, stronger than before. The house came together slowly. Not just contractors, but volunteers, neighbors. A young man named Daryl from 3 streets over brought lunch every Saturday for the crew. Said his father had been fined out of his first home. He told me this rebuild was for more than MIT, was for all the quiet families who'd never had the chance to fight back. It felt different this time. It wasn't just a home anymore, that was a symbol. While my house came back to life, so did the state's conversation on HOA abuse. I was asked to return for a second testimony in front of the House Committee on Residential Law. The chairperson, a sharp woman from the Northern District, leaned in and said, "This is the first time I've seen bipartisan support for anything related to housing law." The bill they introduced was modest but powerful. It included requirements for independent oversight of HOAs, strict limits on fines, and most importantly, a law preventing any HOA from forming without voluntary approval from every property involved. No more automatic inclusion, no more forced dues, and absolutely no more harassment over fence colors and flower beds. They called it the Residential Fairness Act. It passed by a landslide. And just like that, the fire that burned my house lit a fuse across the state. I kept working quietly. Fireline expanded. We began consulting on cases in other states. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had learned something in all of this. People don't expect to need protection until it's too late. They sign HOA forms without reading. They trust the smiling neighbor in the cardigan who says, "Oh, it's just a few simple rules." Until the rules turn into surveillance. Until the friendly smiles become silence. Until one day, they wake up, fined, threatened, or worse, evicted. No more. We taught them what to ask, what to challenge, what rights they had and didn't have. But there's something else I learned. Something deeper. The law protects rights, but people protect dignity. One afternoon, I came home from a Fireline meeting to find a group of kids. In my front yard, they were painting. On canvas boards, art class from the local school. Their teacher told me they'd chosen my house because they wanted to paint a place that stood for something. I stood on that new porch, the same one that once caught fire, and looked at what they saw. A place not defined by ash, but by strength. Linda's sentence was eventually reduced to 4 years with rehabilitation. I didn't fight it. In fact, I wrote a letter to the court, not to defend her but to release myself. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not at the HOA, not even at the man who set the fire, because I had rebuilt. And not just my home. I rebuilt trust. I rebuilt the conversation. I rebuilt the idea that standing your ground doesn't mean standing alone. The final piece of my house was a stone, set into the front walkway. Etched into it were the words, "We don't burn, we rise." People stop and read it all the time. The mayor did, when he visited. So did the local news team, and so did my old friend Wallace, a retired judge like me. He chuckled and said, "That sounds exactly like something you'd have carved in stone." I smiled. "It's not for me," I said. "It's for whoever walks here next, because someday, someone else will be challenged, bullied, harassed, by people who think they can push without consequence. And maybe they'll remember this story, the one where a man stood up against fire, law, and fear and won, not with rage, not with revenge, but with truth. That's how you beat injustice. Not with bigger fists but with deeper roots. Roots that no fire can touch.